Hey there, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 5 of Collin and Mono. Just me today, just me on the microphone, and I just kind of wanted to take this episode to have a chat with y'all and see how things are going, and talk a little bit about myself and my vision for the show, where I'm at in terms of the virus and everything. We're just going to have a fun little chat with this episode. So let's get started, shall we? I hope you and yours are doing okay. I know this is a crazy and very uncertain time that we're living in. And quite frankly, it's a historic time. We've never seen anything like this whole virus situation that's going on in our world right now. So just do your best to make sure you're following what your local government says. You're adhering to social distancing, staying healthy. I know I've been cooped up in my apartment for, I don't know, probably about a week now. I should probably do a better job of getting myself outside. That way I don't go nuts. But yeah, just make sure you're okay and got what you need and all that stuff. And also, I would just like to give a huge shout out to all of our medical workers out there. I know they're working terribly hard, and especially here in Seattle, the hospitals are especially busy. They're very full, and it's difficult for anyone who isn't experiencing symptoms of the virus itself to get any sort of medical care. But I guess right now that's kind of the sacrifice we have to make, because this virus is doing a lot of damage to different people. I will say situation out here in Seattle, and I'm sure a lot of places, is pretty dire economically. Hopefully this whole government bill passes where people get money at the time of this recording. I know the situation is changing every single day, and so you got to kind of play it by ear, and more so than any other time probably ever. I think that's the scariest part of all this, is just the uncertainty. But I hope much of you out there, like myself, have a very healthy support system. I do have a lot of people that I can talk to, that I can rely on to be there for mental health and emotional health, really. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've been spending a lot of time on the phone and on PlayStation, just talking with friends and family. And they really have helped me get through a lot of this stuff. Yeah, so make sure, if you haven't already, keep in contact with your family. I'm sure right now they would love to hear from you, because it's just a very difficult time. And so I'm hoping things like podcasts like this show and other things, like video games, stuff like that, help you from going stir crazy. That's kind of the idea. I know podcasting has really helped me out. Some of my favorite podcasts, which I'll get into a little bit later, they've been huge to helping me stay sane. And I know for myself that this whole virus thing has definitely put my life on halt. And I'm sure it has for a lot of you people too. But on the bright side, it has given me a lot of time to do a lot of the things that I really like, my hobbies, like doing this show and playing video games and reading books and studying, things like that. Yeah. So the brew that I work at, that I referenced a lot on my episode with Mac, episode 3, that is officially closed for the rest of the duration of this virus. So it's temporary. They're not permanently closing, but shout out to my people at Optimism Brewing. I know this is a particularly difficult time, because when you go so long seeing the people that you work with 2-3 times a week, if not more, it can be really disheartening, because we were all really close at that place. And so going this long without seeing each other, it definitely feels like a form of loss. That's for sure. Definitely miss all you guys at Optimism. But luckily I was able to pick up another job, but that's also been stalled on because of the virus. So I will definitely keep you guys updated there, and let you know what's going on once my start date happens and things like that. It's just really difficult out here, and we just got to be patient. Anyways, So let's get back to the topic at hand, which is the show, Collin and Mono. How do you guys think the show is going? How do I think it's going? I would love to hear from you guys, what you do and don't like. Of course, be constructive if you can, please. But so far, I'm pretty proud of the show. I do have quite a few ideas kicking around in my head of shows I'd like to do next. Getting those scheduled right now so we can get more episodes out to you. I think I have some really fun topics in mind, and I think part of making this show was keeping it ambiguous as to what exactly it is. And I don't know if that means this show has an identity crisis or not. I'm not entirely sure. It's more so because I wanted to leave it open-ended so I can do whatever I want with this particular show. I didn't want to sort of keep it limited to one or two topics or keep it as an interview show. I wanted to be able to do episodes like this where it's just me and you, the listener, and be really intimate, and even potentially in the future have an open discussion. If you guys have questions or topics that you'd like me to talk about, or ideas, or hell, if you have an interesting topic that you are really passionate about that you would like to talk to on the show, reach out to me. I am more than happy to talk to anyone with a very strong passion, because I am here to learn, and I'm here to just chat with people. That's my favorite thing in the world, and just chat with you, the listener, too, on top of that. So this podcast, I don't know how long I'm going to keep it going. It is just kind of like a fun project. If it continues to go well and I feel like continuing it, I'm going to continue it. But what I would like to provide, though, is as much consistency as I can give you as possible. The best quality show I can give you, the best sounding show. I think audio quality is very important. And when I can, a plethora of interesting guests that bring about great conversation. I think one of the best compliments I've gotten so far is, hey, you made something that I have no interest in interesting to me. So I think that means you have a successful show, and I don't think there's a bigger compliment that I could ever get. That is definitely one of my goals for this show. So thank you for that. So let me talk about today how I got into podcasting, because it's not something that you just kind of, I don't know. It's something you got to be passionate about to do it as long as I have already. I mean, I've been podcasting for nearly, it's been maybe closing on 4 years. And I will tell you that the beginning of my podcasting journey was not a very good one. I was very rough around the edges at the beginning. Used a lot of hesitation words, lost my train of thought a ton. I mean, I still use quite a few hesitation words, but especially now, since doing this by yourself makes it a little bit more difficult. But I began talking about video games for the school paper at Ohio State, and I had a blast doing it. I was brought on by somebody I had met in a class who was now my roommate. His name is Robert. And he asked me after class one day, because we had a class together called Video Games and the Individual. And I sort of hinted at this in my episode with Chase, but we had this class together. And after class one day, he noticed that I was the dummy that was constantly raising my hand and adding my own anecdotes to everything we talked about in the class, because my biggest passion is definitely video games, and I'm trying to turn that into a career. So Robert noticed, and he asked me to be on his podcast for The Lantern, which is the school paper at Ohio State. So I agreed, and we started doing the show together, and I had a blast doing it. Even though I wasn't very good at it, I was slowly getting better and better. And that's when I learned that podcasting is one of those things that the more you do it, just the easier it becomes. So that's why back then there's no way in hell I could have never done something like this that I'm doing right now, just talking to a microphone and essentially talking to the wall. So back then that would have scared the hell out of me, and there's no way I probably could have done it. But yeah, that was my humble beginnings there. And then after Robert had graduated, we realized we still wanted to do a podcast rather, about video games. So Robert brought on board someone previously from On LAN at the Lantern, which is the podcast, who had graduated earlier, and his name was Jack. And so we started Tiny Disc to talk about video games. And boy, do you want to talk about talking into the void. It turns out that if you don't have much of a following, it's really hard to break into video game podcasting. There's just not a whole lot of people that want to walk away from the Greg Millers or the Collin Moriartys or the Giant Bombs of the world. Those guys just have such a strong following, and they've been in the game for so long. And I get it. I'm a fan of all of those guys, and they know what the hell they're doing. They're professionals. So I definitely cannot blame them, and they definitely have insider knowledge as far as the industry goes too. So yeah, so we decided, because we left it open for Tiny Desk to do general nerd culture, pop culture stuff too. And so we started podcasting about Terrace House. We did an episode here and there talking about the show, and those, lo and behold, were our most successful episodes that we had done. So we took that idea and we're like, hey, what if we pivoted completely towards doing Terrace House content? And at first, I will admit, I was a little taken aback, because at the time I liked Terrace House a ton, and I still do. But I didn't think that it would be something that I would be super interested in doing as a full podcast. That was the sole focus of the podcast. But, you know, I loved podcasting with Jack and Robert so much that I said, you know what, screw it. We'll do the show. And so around that time when we had started Tadaima is when I had moved out to Seattle with Robert. And in my grad program, because I moved here for graduate school, in my grad program at UW, I met Daly, who is now our fourth chair in Tadaima. And she had told me all about her podcasting experience. And I know she conducted herself well. She had an interest in Japanese culture. And so I came up with the idea one day that we should ask her to be on the show, because not only does Daly know how to conduct herself in a podcast, but I think Tadaima, and I think we all agreed, we needed a female perspective on top of that. So Daly was basically the full package. Not only was she great and fun to talk to and a good friend of mine, but she also had an interest in Japanese culture. She knew how to speak Japanese, and she gave some very good perspective on the different things that happened in Terrace House. So I think that's a good reason, or a big reason, why Terrace House, or Tadaima, a Terrace House podcast, is so successful. And I'm super proud of that podcast to this day, and it's still going every Tuesday. So there's that. And that's as far as my podcasting journey goes. But I never really pictured myself back then when I first started podcasting as a podcaster. I'd only just recently gotten into listening to podcasts, and it never really occurred to me that is something that I could be doing. And now it's one of my favorite things to do. I like talking into a microphone and talking to a wall, and yeah. So who are some of my inspirations for podcasting? Well, I mentioned Greg Miller and Collin Moriarty before. Those are probably two of my favorite podcasters ever, and following both of those guys has been an absolute pleasure. I even had the opportunity to podcast with Collin Moriarty on his Fireside Chats when that was still going. If you want to listen to that, that's episode 99. We talk about music and my time playing in a band together with my friends. And it was just an all-around blast of a show. I even got to fly out to LA for the first time, which was pretty surreal. I had never set foot in California before then. So that was a whole thing. And yeah, I got to sit across from him and just chat about music. And I think we had a really good time together. And through that community too, Colin's Last Stand, Collin Moriarty's podcast, through that community, I've met a lot of really good friends of mine now, John O'Peck and Chase Williams, especially Chase, who I had on the podcast, and I'm sure Jono I'll have on at some point. But both of those guys do podcasts themselves, and their insight into the gaming industry and the way they approach games is just it's definitely an important part of my podcasting journey. It's pretty influential on me. And not only that, in some ways, both of them has sort of helped me into this video game career that I'm on now, this path. Yeah. So those are some of my biggest influences when it comes to podcasting. And I have been asked before, is this going to be a video game podcast, which would be pretty on brand for me, but I don't really see Collin and Mono. I mean, there might be a light focus on video games just because that's my personal taste, but I don't ever see that being the main focus of the show, because that's just not what this is. I want it to be more me essentially being a student of the world, as cheesy as that sounds, but just learning all I can about all kinds of different topics. That's the most important part of all this for me, is just taking the time and listening to people and their stories. I like to listen to life stories, man. That's one of my favorite things. I like to learn where people came from and how their life differs from mine. I always think of this revelatory moment that I had, and again, you're gonna notice that I can be pretty cheesy. I'm also a hopeless romantic, go figure, right? And so yeah, when I was going to Ohio State, I had a day when I was walking across campus, and I think everyone sort of realizes this at some point, but I had this realization that every person that I was walking by, every face that I saw, whether I knew them or not, they were someone that had their own lives, their own sets of problems, and everyone goes through shit. And realizing that everyone comes from a different background, a different culture, and was raised differently, that's I think what set off the whole idea of I'm just so interested in people and where they come from and who they are. And as someone who grew up in a small blue collar town in the Midwest in Ohio, excuse me, my hometown was 98% white, and so when I came across people of different cultures and backgrounds, I only had a million questions to ask. It was genuine curiosity. And of course some of it came from a place of ignorance too. We all have to start somewhere. And I was definitely pretty ignorant, and still to a degree, I still am, but I'm doing my best to learn and be open-minded. And I feel like, I've come a long way. I've come a long way in that sense. But I am super proud of where I grew up, and I think that it's been instilled in me work ethic and sticking with things and leadership and stuff like that. That's how my parents sort of raised me, to be kind and to I guess lead by doing, really is what it can be boiled down to, long story short. Yeah, so I can't remember quite where I was going with this, but that's sort of, I guess, what led me here. I just like being a storyteller. That's what a lot of my life has been. But I think moving forward, as I sort of focus on where I want to go with my life, I want to be better at sort of documenting my life, because I know it's not necessarily all stuff that people would want to hear and things like that, but it to a degree, I am sort of using this show to document my life and where I am right now. And I know there's a lot of people that don't get to do that. I'm someone who I don't take a whole lot of photographs of myself or my friends, but what I do is I do record myself pretty frequently, and I can at least get a snapshot of my mindset at the time. And in a way, I think that's almost more important than seeing how we looked a few years ago or something like that. Knowing where we stand in terms of mindset and how that changes. Because I think we all have our own sort of evolution of mind in a way. So yeah, life is kind of on hold. Gonna keep waiting on the start date for this new job and start working towards where I want to be with my career. I'm sure a lot of you guys, your life is on hold too. So I hope that this show sort of helps you out and helps you get through the day a little bit more. I know the days are sort of blurring together, at least for me. But the thing sort of pulling me through is that I know this thing will end, and that should be pulling all of us through. This thing will eventually be over with. And until then, I'm going to keep bringing you content every week. So stick with me, and if you'll have me, and let's get through this thing together, huh? Let's do it. So that's it for me today. If you want to follow the show on Instagram and Twitter, you can follow me at Collin in Mono. That's Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to email the show, any comments, questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns, you can email the show at collininmono@gmail.com. Again, ending song by Life Before Us, translation by Life Before Us, produced and written by Christian Crump. And that'll do it for me. I'll see you next Wednesday. Goodbye.